And after we remove the air intake manifold, we see that there used to be some sort of bird's nest down in the valley of this engine. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Today we are going to be changing a starter and a heater control valve on this Nissan Armada. So let's get into it. First thing we're going to do is take off the engine beauty cover. It's held on by 2 bolts in the front and 2 little clamps in the back. Then we'll take off the air intake, remove that mass airflow sensor. Take off the hose clamp that connects the hose to the throttle body. And there's 2 hoses that connect the air intake plenum to the valve covers, some engine breather hoses. We'll remove both of those. After that, you can pull this out and take it out of the way. Try to leave as much hose attached as you can, and then it's always good to disconnect your battery. We're going to take the fuse box cover off, and we're going to find our fuel pump fuse. As you can see there, it is the last 15 amp fuse right before 10 amp, where you can also count spaces. After that fuse is out, it should reduce the fuel pressure in the line. Then we'll remove the 4 bolts that hold the throttle body onto the air intake manifold. A few hoses that hook up to this, but we're just going to set it in front and take it out of the way. No need to disconnect those. And because I don't want to lose my hardware, I'm going to put the 4 bolts back into the air intake manifold. Next, we have some more vacuum lines and hoses to remove. On the driver's side, we have one there on the top, and then another one that plugs right in behind the throttle body. And the key to remove these hoses is to pull and twist. And then we'll need to take off the fuel line. There is a cover that goes over the fuel line. It's kind of like a safety cover. After we take the cover off, you're going to need to use a quick disconnect. It'll slide into the fuel line, and then you'll be able to take it off. There will be some fuel that comes out, but it's not a lot, and if you've let the car sit for about an hour after you take the battery off and the fuse out, the amount of fuel that comes out will practically be nothing. And after you take the fuel line off, I put a glove over it because I don't want anything dirty getting in there and then getting into an injector later on. Next up, there is a small bracket that attaches to the side of the air intake manifold. It's held on by 2 bolts, the one you just saw me remove, and then there's another bolt hiding up underneath that hose that I'm pointing at there. After those bolts are off, we can try to slide this out of the way. There are a few clamps that attach that hose to the fuel rail, and because the fuel rail is part of the air intake assembly, we'll have to take those clamps off. Almost done on the driver's side. There's one more wire harness clamp we have to take out. I hate these clamps. They're a pain to get out, but they're easy to put in. Now we're going to move on to the passenger side of the vehicle. Only one hose to remove on this side. You finally get it off. You need to take off the bolt that holds the transmission dipstick housing to the air intake. Next, we have 2 more of those stupid wire harness clamps that need to come off. After you get those out of the way, you want to go ahead and plug all 4 of your fuel injectors. Then you can move that whole harness out of the way, and that can let you see right between the air intake and the cylinder head. There's a bunch of dirt and grime in there. We don't need to remove all of it, but we do want to remove anything that's loose because that could fall into the engine. There's 2 ways to do this. You could use some shop air, or if you don't have shop air or air compressor handy, you can use some spray can air and get most of the loose stuff out. Now I want to do the same thing to the driver's side. Take out all of the fuel injector plugs. There is one more hose to remove, which connects your back of your intake to your brake booster. It's an important hose to remove. It's also the most important hose to put back on, otherwise you'll have no power brakes. Now the first two bolts for the air intake manifold are actually pretty easy to get to, but as you go further back, it gets a lot more difficult due to the placement of the firewall. And today is our first day using a new toy. We have an action cam here. It lets me get another shot so you can actually see what I'm doing in here. Now, this action cam is actually provided by one of our sponsors, which is A Dad's Guide to Saving and Investing. So if you're watching this video, you're probably like me, you do all your repairs yourself and you save a lot of money. But what do you do with that money to make sure it works for you? Well, that's all detailed here. If you want to get this book, the link is in the description. You actually can get an ebook or a hard copy. And there, as we get to the back, the very back two bolts, you're all the way underneath the firewall. And if you have 5-foot arms, this is easy. But if you have short arms like me, it's a little bit more difficult. And then on the passenger side, it's even more difficult because the heater control valve hose is like right in your way. But it's not impossible. You can get it out. And I will say that I leave all the bolts in the air intake manifold because the manifold itself is about an inch thick, so I don't have to worry about them tipping over. And then after everything's loose, you can pull the manifold out. You just want to be careful and take your time. And there you have it. Now there is one more step to do to make sure that you keep this job cheap. You want to make sure that you cover those holes because that is actually your intake side of your cylinder head. Should you drop anything in there and the valve is open, it will fall into your cylinder, and if you don't take it out and crank the engine, you will destroy it. So you want to make sure you put some tape over that to cover it up. And then there's a bunch of cool stuff down in the valley of the engine that you can find and keep for later. All right. Brief little detour, we're going to go ahead and change out the heater control valve. So this clamp right here that goes to the bottom side of the heater control valve is, I'm going to say, impossible to get to, at least for me, while the air intake manifold is on. So if you're going to change out the heater control valve and you're not going to remove the air intake, I would recommend just cutting and splicing that hose. Just make sure that you use a double-sided barb that is either brass or aluminum, something that won't create rust in the long term. But that hose is a pain to get to even with the intake off just because it's so far back there. Now we remove the other side of the heater control valve hose, which goes into the heater core into the dash. As always, the key to removing these hoses is to pull and twist at the same time. There is a little bit of coolant that will come out, but it's not much. Next, we use a slotted screwdriver or flathead screwdriver. Just put it in the side of that plug and pull. It should come out. The control valve itself is only held on by one nut. The stud is attached to the firewall, so that just slides off. And then the last step we have another one of those wire harness plugs that needs to come out. And then we can remove the old heater control valve unit. And here's a shot of the part number that we're putting in. And I recommend putting both of the hoses on first before you bolt it to the firewall, just to make it a little bit easier on you. Now this hose actually had one clamp already installed, but it's kind of cool. Haven't seen this before. The clamp is held open when it comes to you, so all you have to do is put something in there and pry it closed. So as soon as you pry it closed, it will snap closed and it's on. It's that easy. Fortunately, the bottom side did not come with one of those, so we'll have to use the old clamp. Not a big deal, but that clamp is a pain to get on there, just like it's a pain to get off, just because it's so far back behind the engine and I have short, tiny arms. Alright, now that's on. All we gotta do is put the control valve onto the stud, tighten the nut down, and plug our wires back in. Now that that's out of the way, we're going to get back to changing out our starter. As you can see by this wrench on the screen here, that is where the 2 bolts are to the starter. The 2 bolts actually face the firewall away from you and they are a pain to get off. Here's a shot with the action cam. Unfortunately, I couldn't get enough leverage to actually loosen it while I was holding the action cam. So as you can see here, I recommend getting on the driver's side of the engine because then you can pull the bolt towards you and you have a little bit more leverage on it than if you're pushing it. Also, be sure you might want to wear some gloves because I did smash my hands against some hoses there and some hose clamps, and it did hurt pretty good. Then you can take both of those bolts out and you can pull the starter back. Next, you'll need to remove a plastic cover that covers the power wire to the starter, and then the power wire, at least in my case, had some corrosion on it. It was almost harder to undo than the actual screws that held the starter in place. Now the nut is off, just remove that and the old starter will come out with one more plug to unplug. I didn't get that on camera, but you can see it when I put it back in. There's that white piece, that's just one plug that goes to the ignition switch in your car. Now we'll install the power wire back onto the starter first. Torquing it down here. I'm just going to use German torque, just good and tight. Doesn't need to be crazy torqued there. And if you thought getting the starter bolts out was hard, starting them is even worse. I stated before, you're leaning over the engine, you really have no leverage, you can't see what you're doing, you just have to feel it. You may as well just close your eyes. And then we can just get those tight before we torque it up. I'm going to go ahead and put that plug on. And I didn't like the way it was sitting, so I'm just going to zip tie it to this existing wire harness. Keep it off the engine, that's hot. Next, we just have to torque the 2 bolts that hold the starter in place, which is also pretty difficult. You may want to make sure that you have a good hold onto the bolts themselves so your torque wrench doesn't slip off and you bust your knuckles into the firewall. I'm going to go ahead and spray some carb cleaner on these gaskets. There's some dirt around the edge of the gaskets that'll make it a little bit harder to take off. So if you clean it with some carb cleaner first, it makes it easier to remove. These gaskets are definitely stuck in there. After all the gaskets are off, you want to make sure that you clean it up before you put your new gaskets in. And since we have it here, we may as well clean the whole air intake manifold, make it nice and shiny. Then I'm going to wipe off some excess dirt grease with a rag. Now we can start putting in our new gaskets. And I'm using gloves here because I don't want to get any dirt inside of anything. And just to show you a shot why you should replace your air intake gaskets here, if you can see, the other one is the old one is a dark green color, and it's actually a little bit shorter because over the years it's gotten compressed. Now you could put that back on, but you may not get a perfect seal. If that happens, you're likely to get an engine code from running too lean or too rich. Now that the starter and the heater control valve are in, all we have to do is remove the tape that's covering up the intake side to our cylinder heads. Now when I put the air intake manifold back in, I don't have the bolts in. I'm going to start with putting in the front 2 bolts because those are the easiest. We don't want to torque everything down, we just kind of want them hand tight. The front 2 are easy because you can actually see them. Getting to the back 2 is a little bit more difficult. You just have to feel it, but after you get them in, getting the other bolts in is actually a breeze. After everything is tight, you want to make sure that you torque it. Now, the most important thing here is that you stick to the torque sequence that's in the book. If you don't, you're likely not to get a perfect seal, and as stated before, if you don't get a perfect seal, your engine's not going to run right. It'll run lean or run rich, depending on if air is coming in or air is escaping. And that passenger side back bolt is a pain to get to, once again, but it's not impossible. You just have to feel for it, and you may have to play around with the size of the extensions that you're using. And then one last gasket to change out. We want to change out that throttle body gasket because you should get that in the kit with your air intake manifold gaskets. Now we're going to put the throttle body back on, hook up our wiring, get all those bolts torqued back down. Then we're going to hook up all of the plugs to our fuel injectors. And the most important hose, as stated earlier, is that hose that connects to your brake booster. Do not forget to put this back on, as your engine won't run right, first thing, and second thing, you won't have any brakes, at least not power brakes. Then we'll hook up some more of these vacuum lines. Don't forget to put the 2 bolts in that we took out earlier. More hoses, plenty of hoses on this engine. Next, we're going to put our fuel line back on. I'm going to remove my protective glove there. And this fuel line should just slide right back into place. And then you want to make sure you put that cover back on. You want to make sure that you put it on and then twist it so that the open side faces down. That way, if it does try to come loose, gravity will hold it on. Then some more hose work. A lot of vacuum lines to put back on. Put our bolt back in that holds our transmission dipstick housing on. Make sure all your wire harnesses are good to go. Then we can put the air intake back on. Don't forget to connect the 2 hoses that attach to the valve covers on either side. Plug in all the wiring harnesses, all the wiring harness clamps, plug in your mass airflow sensor. Also, don't forget to tighten down the throttle body hose. Reinstall your 15 amp fuse that goes to your fuel pump. Reinstall the fuse box cover. Hook your battery back up. Get those leads good and tight, and then we're almost done. We have one more thing left to do because we removed some coolant from the system. We'll need to add some of it back. You want to make sure that you're using coolant that's designed for your car. I'm going to go ahead and put in some pre-diluted so I don't have to mix it. And now you're ready to get things started up.
was a man looking for a man called the Oracle, like a prophet. And he finds
Can't get out of the car.
because it'll kind of keep everybody together as we're...
There's the handle.
So each
Where are the
door
lights?
opens up a stream of mysteries. I mean, all sorts of... We'll probably be able to sell one or two in each door, but...
All right. We are running. Got warning, low washer fluid. Let's see here if we can just exit that. Wrong side, this side. Got tire pressure light going off over here, no big deal. All right, low washer fluid. And that appears to be it. A little bit of a slow start because there was some air in the fuel lines, but that clears up very nicely. So now I'm going to turn it off. Something is ticking in the back, don't know what that is. Turn it on again, see if it starts any faster this time. And that's it. That's all she wrote. All right. Woohoo. I'm gonna leave it run for a little bit and see if we can spot any coolant leaks.